Hello, and welcome to JEHC, the Jason Elvis Herdcast. This is episode number 2, and we are going to have a discussion today on the topic of luxury pre-runners. I am going to define that term, and I'm going to explain to you why that definition is important and why it must be upheld. But before we dive into that, let's discuss real quick who I am. My name is Jason Elvis Herd. I am owner of Tech Consulting Inc. and DIY Off-Road, as well as other things, including PIY printers and other cool bits that do pertain to the off-road industry as well as motorsports as a whole. I have my quote-unquote 9-to-5, which is Tech Consulting Inc., and we design for race teams, manufacturers, privateers, etc., in chassis and suspension design and development. We also dabble in the new world of 3D printing for stuff like race car bodies and other avenues of motorsports. But when it pertains to luxury pre-runners and off-road in general, it would be important to note that I have a few decades of experience in this. Currently spent the last decade consulting for builders, like I was saying, doing the design of chassis, suspensions, both proprietary and non-proprietary designs, and I will get into that later. For race teams, different builders, companies that sell these type of components, and privateers. So those would be guys that are a private funded race team or a toy, so to speak, that they want to build themselves, etc. Now let's get into the definition of luxury pre-runner, and then I'll tell you why this is so important. So I define a luxury pre-runner as a tube chassis vehicle with a steel cab, working doors, and a full interior. Now, when I say tube chassis, what I'm referring to is a full-on chassis just like you would find in a trophy truck or an equivalent vehicle. So that could be a 6100, 7200, things along these lines. Now, that in a luxury pre-runner platform by default means there cannot be any stock frame rails whatsoever in a luxury pre-runner. This also means that we are going to then take the tube chassis, put the cab on the chassis, doors, etc., and then build out the interior appropriately. And I will go through this in detail shortly. Now, the reason for this definition is twofold. One, there's a lot of people that are inappropriately applying the term luxury pre-runner to their builds, etc., especially in stuff like for sale ads, and you know who the fuck you are, and it's bullshit, because you're diluting the term and you're trying to make your vehicle seem like something it's not in an effort to kind of scam someone who may be not understanding specifically what they are looking at or understand the caliber of what a luxury pre-runner truly is. So by diluting this term and pretending your vehicle or your build is a luxury pre-runner to, in essence, either get more money for the project or to just boast for no reason other than dick measuring is pretty much bullshit. And this has got to stop. It is, and on the other side of the table, like I said, it is entirely disingenuous and disrespectful to those who put their blood, sweat, and tears into building what is a true luxury pre-runner. These vehicles take an absorbent amount of discretionary income. They are by no means cheap. They are arguably the most expensive vehicles inside the off-road industry as a whole. And more importantly, they take certain caliber of skill sets from both the design and fabrication that are only accumulated over the course of decades. The individuals who are building true luxury pre-runners have honed their skills purely by obsession. This is not a specific avenue of the industry, so to speak, where you can make millions of dollars building luxury pre-runners. In fact, there's not a lot of profit in building vehicles of this nature simply because they are insanely time-consuming. It is purely a business of passion. Those building these vehicles, those who are the fabricators, the builders themselves, i.e. the individuals who own the shops that are building the vehicles, and the individuals designing these vehicles do so far more out of passion than they do out of a get-rich-quick type of scheme. So we do not want to deteriorate that passion, and more importantly, we do not want to deteriorate that craftsmanship that these guys uphold. When it comes to the off-road racing industry, those who are truly building luxury pre-runners are, let's be crystal clear, the highest caliber of craftsmen that are in our industry. And there's a reason for this. These vehicles are gorgeous. These vehicles are just absolutely insane when it comes to performance. They are on the same level as a trophy truck, hence luxury Prerunner tube chassis. So they are used to go and pre-run race courses that these race teams are going to be racing on. Now, to be fair, not everyone that owns these luxury Prerunners will be doing so. And some of the race teams do not use luxury Prerunners to pre-run. They will be using a race truck or something similar. But the point of the luxury Prerunner is to pre-run a race in style. And doing so, and I'm going to get into some of the interior stuff, etc., but in doing so, in sort of like this lap of luxury interior as opposed to what would be considered a race truck, which typically are a little bit rough, and they're built to go racing. So they are designed in a fashion of race mentality, which is to go fast and win, as opposed to a luxury Prerunner where you are typically going to be spending time at speed, race speed, etc. But more importantly, you're also going to stop. You're going to do some cruising. You want to be comfortable. You want the air conditioning. You want to have some music on. And you're also going to, in most cases, have a third occupant, unlike almost all race trucks, other than the late, great Pistol Pete's race truck. And with that said, there is a clear line between the two as far as race truck and luxury Prerunner. Now, not to get confusing in that aspect, there are some individuals who do race their luxury Prerunners. So in some circumstances and some classes of racing and some sanctioning bodies, they do allow luxury Prerunners to enter, and I believe some of them are labeled as a sportsman class, etc., etc. So to be fair, there are some guys that will race their luxury Prerunners. Now, let's go back to our root definition. That is a tube chassis truck, tube chassis being that it is identical suspension, setup, concept, design as what would be a competitive trophy truck, a cab on said tube chassis. Now, these can be Ford, Dodge, whatever you want to call it. They can be old, they can be new, but it is a steel, some are the new aluminum cabs, with the doors of said truck. So the sheet metal factor of that is going to be stock in form and nature, i.e. Chevy, GM, whatever. And then the interior will be completely sealed and all done up. So it's going to be, you're going to see stuff like leather wrapped tubes. You're going to see nice headliners. You're going to see embroidered seats. You're going to see a lot of comfort, carpet, a lot of cool stuff that you would forego in a race truck environment. Now, that we understand what the definition is and why we're defining it, let's go some roundabout costs. Luxury Prerunners in general, buying turkey, etc., which means you're purchasing turnkey from a builder. They're going to start in the mid to high 300s range, 350,000 plus, and they're probably going to land in the 700-800 range on the high side. And obviously, there's some variables in that. So to be clear, it's about 350,000 to 800,000 range, depending on the builder, bells and whistles, things like that. So there is a good variance in what would be considered the cost of a luxury Prerunner. Now, to put that into perspective, a $100,000 build is more likely than not a luxury Prerunner, simply because by default, to get to the caliber of a luxury Prerunner, the parts alone are well above $100,000. Sometimes the drivetrain packages are well above $100,000, and that's just drivetrain. So we want to keep that in mind as well. These are vehicles that take a lot of discretionary income. It's not something that you can simply just go finance and then be driving around off a dealership lot per se. These are built from the ground up by the builders themselves. So it's not something that is just sitting on a showroom floor. You would go to said builder, you would order the truck. They would take anywhere from 6 months to maybe 18 months, maybe 2 years on the high side to appropriately build the Prerunner. Typically speaking, in the events that they do take longer than a few years, that's usually a financial issue, so to speak, as opposed to the builder. So sometimes guys will do it by chunks, i.e. build the first chunk, a few $100,000, second chunk, a few $100,000, and that could drag on over the course of a few years, which is just, different strokes for different folks. Some builders could possibly hustle and get you a truck inside of a year. Obviously you're paying that lump sum straight up. So if you have that sort of discretionary income, you're probably not even watching this. But regardless, just to give you guys some insight on how the acquisition of these vehicles works, as opposed to just buying your. Oh, and just to be clear, your Ford Raptor is not a luxury pre-runner. There is no equivalency between a Ford Raptor and a luxury pre-runner. And when I go to show some of the Stewart stuff, even though theirs are technically Ford Raptor pre-runners, they are not anything like the Ford Raptor you would be buying on the dealership or your buddy has, et cetera, et cetera. So again, they are nowhere close to the same. Referring to them as the same, again, is stupid. And that just means you are stupid, you sound stupid, to anyone that knows what they're looking at or talking about. So let's go real quick to some layouts of this type of stuff. These vehicles, Jack, you can bring it over real quick. So this is a DIY off-road. I do own this site, full disclosure, and these are a bunch of my designs and various applications. But it's just a good way of showing some examples before we dive into other stuff. Now, the layouts in these are typically going to be extended cab. Almost the majority of luxury pre-runners are a 3-seat platform that are in extended cab fashion. This right here is an extended cab, and this is a good example of what I'm referring to as the cab is placed on a tube chassis. It's very important. Again, we hold this definition out of respect for the craftsmanship and discretionary income it takes to build real luxury pre-runners. If you have stock frame rails or anything along those lines, you are by default not a luxury pre-runner. Sorry, we have to draw the line somewhere. Now, this is an extended cab. This is a 3-seat platform. Now, in extended cabs, sometimes you can find them and they'll tuck 4 seats into that application. And sometimes that will work out just fine. And sometimes it's really cramped and weird, et cetera, et cetera. So in this 3-seat configuration, typically you're going to find the rear seat is going to be centered. Basically, your ass of the rear seat is right above the drive shaft, and you're kind of sitting above the rear tail section of the gearbox assembly. Now, the driver and co-driver are in the normal positions to some degree. So again, that is, pretty basic. But this specific one you are seeing here is a GMT 800 Silverado. So that's a 99 to 06 Chevy Silverado cab. And then the chassis itself is a very simple one. This one is one of our stage 1 chassis. So again, it's an entry-level luxury pre-runner by definition, but it is still technically a luxury pre-runner given that it is a tube chassis cab and it will have a full interior. Now, with that said, there are definitely crew cab applications. Let me show you one of those. Here we go. So here's a crew cab variant of a luxury pre-runner that we did. This one is a classic Ford, and it's a 4-seater. And again, tube chassis. And then let me show you a single cab luxury pre-runner. This is a single cab classic Ford luxury pre-runner we did for a client. So for obvious reasons, this only has a co-driver and driver. So the crew cabs, you could fit 4 people. Typically, some of them might actually be a 3-seater. The extended cabs usually are going to be 3-seaters. Sometimes they'll be a 4-seater. As far as wheelbases and track widths go, here's a few general numbers, and it doesn't mean that the builders stick to this. It just means these are some generalities. Full size is going to be right around like 91 to 94 inches in track width. Some may be a hair more, some may be a hair less. In wheelbases, for like a single cab, they're going to be right around 124, 125, maybe 126. Extended cab trucks are going to be right around 134 range, 135 range. And crew cabs typically will be about 142 to 145 inch in wheelbase. Again, these are generalities. I'm sure you can find a truck that is different, so don't be posting on here that I'm an idiot because I didn't say that specific number. I'm just giving you generalities, and whatever your buddy did, if they did it outside of that box, I'm sure it's fine, whatever. So, with that said, now you can understand some of these basic platforms and why that root definition is held with tube chassis, cab on the chassis. Let's go through some of the drivetrain type stuff. Typically, these are all going to be front engine applications, although the guys at ES did design and build, and these are guys that kind of came from Porter, etc., so kind of dating myself with the off-road history there. So if you understand the name Porter, then you've been in this industry at least 2 decades. They did do a mid-engine crew cab Prerunner. And Porter did do a lot of V-drive mid-engine trucks back in the day. So that's one I do know of that is not the traditional front-engine luxury Prerunner platform. Usually, a lot of guys will run built LSs. Some guys will run big blocks. Some guys may even run Ford stuff. A lot of them are GM. Gearbox assemblies, Turbo 400s are pretty common. Some guys are now running some of the bigger, cooler stuff. I know Hollinger has some really big boy stuff in the works right now for luxury Prerunners. Again, just very expensive, but big stuff for big blocks like twin turbo big blocks and some high horsepower applications. And the seats, etc. I did go over, it was 3 and 4 seats, but typically these are going to be race seats. Anyone building a vehicle like this, we tend to, Jack, you can bring it back to me. We tend to steer away from a suspension seat. And the reason is they're just not great safety-wise. There are some inherent design flaws in a suspension seat as a whole when it comes to the human body's movement and relationship to an impact, where a fixed seat is just a better use. Not to mention the cool thing with fixed seats over a suspension seat is we're able to mount those in locations that provide better safety in regard to clearance, i.e. headroom, etc., because a suspension seat takes up a good chunk of space between the bottom of the seat and where the mounts would be, whereas a composite seat is mounting from the side. And so we can build bracketry, etc., and have the seats in an optimal location height-wise in the chassis to both complement headroom for the occupants while still giving visibility and safety for everything. Not to mention that a non-suspension seat with the proper harness setup, which is going to be a traditional 5-belt, maybe 6-belt, depending on your style, etc. And we'll be seeing those here in a minute with some of the builders and some of their vehicles. This is the same equipment you would find in a competitive trophy truck. So again, you're not going to slouch on the safety requirements or aspects as a whole. Typically in luxury Prerunners, the fuel cells are going to be located in the rear behind the housing. That is the most common location. Let me get so here's a good picture of that. So right here, this is like a low 90s gallon cell in a crew cab luxury Prerunner. And it's behind the axle along with the spare tire mounts that go above it. You can see in this photo here. And that is for a few locations. 1, that's the best spot to fit that much fuel. 2, we want that weight back there. It definitely helps with the shock tuning and the characteristics of the chassis to have both spare tires and the cell behind the rear axle, not in just race applications, but both in these luxury Prerunner applications. So almost all the time you're going to see that. It would be very odd or rare if the fuel cell was behind the cab and in front of the axle housing. Typically those vehicles do not handle as well. I'm not saying all the time, I'm just saying typically speaking. So as a generality, you do want both the fuel cell and the tires to be behind the axle housing. And pretty much all of the luxury Prerunners, especially stuff I'm going to show you, that is the application. And again, front engine, again, is the majority of the time going to be the preference for luxury Prerunners. Now, when you're purchasing a luxury Prerunner, you can bring it to me, Jack. Real quick, Jack is here. He does the production bullshit, so that's who I'm talking to when I'm saying bring it back and forth because he can click over. But when it comes to acquiring a luxury Prerunner, there are 3 kind of formats that you're going to go by. If you have the discretionary income to buy one turnkey, you can do so. You contact the builder, etc. They will build one from scratch for you turnkey, i.e. the most expensive route. But then again, you can pick everything else out. It's all brand new and badass, and you're not doing any work other than writing a check and showing up to go drive it when said vehicle is done. So, turnkey means just like you would think. You get in and you turn the key, you're ready to go. Like I said before, those are anywhere from like 350 to 800 range and possibly more depending on variations, etc. The next step down to that would be like buying a roller chassis. A roller chassis would be kind of like what you see right here. Click it over real quick. Yeah, this is basically what a roller chassis looks like. And bring it back. And it's going to be the chassis, so the core structure, the shock mounts, and the suspension to basically make the truck roll. Sometimes they are sold with shock packages. Sometimes they are not sold with shock packages. But a roller is like your bare bones skeleton or the core of the vehicle itself. Typically does not come with drivetrain mounts, body mounts, and all the other bits. So it's just the basic stuff. And now some of the builders will sell you a roller, some will not. Now to take that a step further, let's say you want to build everything yourself, then you could contact an individual like myself. And there's definitely other guys like me, so I'm not trying to specifically endorse me, but it'd be an individual with the skill sets to design one for you, where you're basically paying that individual to do all the CAD or the computer design of the vehicle, the chassis, suspension, and then you would have all of that laser cut and bent, and then you would weld all that up in like your home shop, garage, etc., or your race team shop, however you want to call it, and build the truck yourself. So those are kind of the 3 levels of how you acquire a luxury pre-runner. You do it turnkey, where you do absolutely no work. You buy a roller, where all you're doing is finishing out the roller, so to speak. So the plumbing, the wiring, the sheet metal, all the other ancillary bits. And then there's like the full-on do-it-yourself, where you are just getting the design and the files, and then you are building and fabricating all of it yourself. So those are the 3 levels. Obviously, the do-it-yourself is going to be the lowest cost investment, but the most amount of time. And the turnkey is going to highest cost investment, but the least amount of time. Now, let's go into what is now or becoming the new bee's knees, which is rear-wheel drive, all-wheel drive. And currently, there really isn't an all-wheel drive luxury pre-runner other than a very few examples. Almost all of the luxury pre-runners I'm about to show you and that you will see when you head out to races or when you come across them in the desert, etc., are going to be a rear-wheel drive platform, just like almost all the race trucks. Although all-wheel drive is becoming more popular and more reliable, and something that, again, even I'm getting phone calls in the last few years constantly for. I have designed all-wheel drive trophy trucks and stuff like that, so I'm very familiar with these specific components and bits, and I'll go into that in a second. But first, let's review rear-wheel drive. So on these rear-wheel drive applications, which again is the vast majority, the engine's in the front, you've got your gearbox right behind it, so it kind of splits the driver, co-driver. Then you get your drive shaft heading out to your 3 or 4 link assembly, etc. Now, this is very common for almost all the trucks that are going down Baja, things like that. So it's very... So the people who don't understand the desert racing side of things, we don't really have all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive for the vast majority of vehicles. We are driving fast with a lot of momentum over terrain. We're not necessarily crawling over terrain. We have the hammer down and we are moving. So it's about wheel travel and reliable wheel travel and usable wheel travel, which I will get into in a minute. So typically speaking, trophy trucks and luxury pre-runners are rear-wheel drive. Now, on the all-wheel drive side of things, this is kind of where we're just scratching the surface, so to speak, with both the race trucks and now entering into the luxury pre-runner world. So, Stewart's did build Mark McMillan a all-wheel drive luxury pre-runner in like 1998 range, 99 range. And if I remember correctly, it was a crew cab. In fact, let me see if I can Google it. It was a crew cab Ford. If I can find this is gonna be hilarious because it's definitely older, and I don't see it popping up right now. But the point being is, so all-wheel drive has been done before, etc. Now, back then, the technology was not like we're seeing these days with what would be considered portal all-wheel drive assemblies and trucks. And there's certain types of gearboxes, etc., that we have these days, and front differential systems are just a lot gnarlier than they used to be. So there's 2 basic ways that you can go about building an all-wheel drive luxury pre-runner. Now, I'm going to give you my opinion. Others do share this opinion in our industry. Others may not share this opinion in our industry. And that is very simply put, a front engine all-wheel drive platform is not that great. Ideally, you're going to want a mid-engine all-wheel drive platform for both the dynamics, the weight distribution, and how the truck, generally speaking, is going to grip and grab, so to speak, the earth relative to the weight and weight transfer for moving through the terrain. And that's kind of just a fancy way of saying the mid-engine platform just is far more stable when it comes to an all-wheel drive vehicle and how you drive an all-wheel drive vehicle, because it is totally different than a rear-wheel drive platform. Now, the guys that are racing these totally understand what I'm getting at. The successful all-wheel drive platforms right now are the Mason Motorsports platform. Now, Robbie Gordon does have his Unicorn. Again, it is very similar. It is a mid-engine all-wheel drive. I just designed a mid-engine all-wheel drive for a client as well. More importantly, these are what are considered portal trucks. And where we're going into this is when it comes to an all-wheel drive, there's two variations. There's a less expensive way of building an all-wheel drive Prerunner, and there's a much more expensive way, or the higher caliber way. So let's review the higher caliber route. The higher caliber route would be a portal-based all-wheel drive Prerunner. So let's say, for example, if Mason Motorsports were to build a luxury Prerunner that's based on the same platform as their race-winning trucks, it's going to be a portal-based setup with an offset rear differential and a mid-engine platform. So that is a very expensive set of componentry for the drivetrain. A portal assembly is the uprights that have a 4-gear set, so you're going to have an input for the axle shaft that is above the lower arm. And what this, it's kind of hard to explain without going too far into this. Let's just pull something up real quick, Jack. Hold on. Let me go to, before I get too ahead of ourselves, because this is hard to explain without showing. And I don't want to confuse anyone right off the bat. So this is Tech Consulting. This is my page to be full disclosure, blah, blah, blah. Let's pull up some all-wheel drive stuff to showcase some bits. There we go. Here's an all-wheel drive trophy truck I designed. Okay, so the portal is this front upright over here. And what this allows us to do is, here's your axle coming through, and the axle is located above the center point pivot of the hub and the lower arm bearing assembly. So this comes into a gear set that is located up here that has two either gears, a main, and a sub. And so what that does is that transfers the rotational force down to the hub assembly while letting us maintain the lower arm center point on center with the hub assembly. Now, in a non-portal setup, this axle center point is on center point of the hub, which then forces this lower arm to be significantly lower than that point, i.e. a lot of ground clearance and kind of less wheel travel, because on extension travel, when the suspension goes down, and I'll get into some of these terms here in a minute, you kind of have less. And when I say kind of, because it kind of varies on how you're setting up the suspension to cycle and things like that, can dictate some of these variables as well. But generally speaking, a portal setup is not only going to have better wheel travel, better geometry, but it will also allow much better ground clearance, and it is unfortunately a lot more expensive. But to be crystal clear, it is considered proper for this application. Also, to be clear, this is a mid-engine platform as well. We have an offset drive shaft for that. In fact, I could show you what the housing looks like, and I'll go into some of these terms and terminology here shortly by definition before we get too far. The pinion for this is offset than normal. So in the all-wheel drive platforms, what I'm getting at here is the mid-engine portal-based setups are going to be the superior platform and more expensive platform when it comes to building a luxury Prerunner that's all-wheel drive. Now, and the reality here is these are going to be $800,000 to $1 million to build. That's just the reality, and they could easily infringe above $1 million to build a legitimate all-wheel drive luxury Prerunner that's in the same style and platform as the race-winning all-wheel drives that are currently out there, i.e. Masons. So, with that said, if you were to build a less expensive all-wheel drive, you would go with something that is a non-portal and front engine setup and probably use a steering rack as opposed to a swing set type steering. This specific truck that you see here is a pretty detailed out swing set style setup, and I will get into those differences, but the point being is it's a lot more expensive to do. It's hard to see in this picture, but it's a swing set steering deal. Anyways, so those are like the two variations. So on the expensive all-wheel drives, you're going to have a portal truck mid-engine. You're going to run a swing set steering setup, expensive gearbox, offset differential in the rear, and that is going to be a superior and more expensive luxury Prerunner platform for an all-wheel drive. For something less expensive, you're going to run a non-portal setup. You're probably going to use a steering rack and do like a front engine type of platform. So, for example, if you wanted to build something that's in like the $300,000 range, $350,000, maybe like $500,000 on the high side for like an all-wheel drive platform, but you're on a budget, you would do like what Robbie Woods is doing and build it based on that lower budget style platform, which is a non-portal steering rack with a front engine platform. If you want something that is serious, you are definitely going to go with a mid-engine. You're going to go with a portal-based setup. You're going to have a swing set steering. You're going to have a entire drivetrain that is significantly more advanced. With that said, those are going to be $800,000 to $1 million. Those are far more expensive, and for that reason, it's a little bit more unobtainable, so to speak. So maybe we're going to see some of those. Maybe we won't. Rumor is there are a few that are currently in the works. They're being done properly, and they're going to be probably in that $800,000 to $1 million range, maybe more. So again, those are some variances in how this is kind of panning out because the all-wheel drive stuff is very new. So you can go with a less expensive route. You can go with a much more expensive route. With that said, there's also a lot of money invested into the interiors and things like that. And safety is also a big aspect of an all-wheel drive Prerunner. And you can bring it back to me, Jack. So with the safety, again, you need to have proper seats, proper harnesses, like I had mentioned before. There's a few companies that make really good stuff. It's hard for me just to like specifically pinpoint like what is the best, but the reality is there's about a half dozen companies that make really high quality, safe composite seats that will fit you and fit your body type really well. So that's the other aspect. You don't want seats that don't really fit you that well. You want to be nice and hugged into the vehicle, so to speak. You're also, and all of this stuff is going to be of race caliber. So it's going to be the exact same componentry that you would find in a trophy truck. Same with harnesses and things along those lines. And that goes for all occupants. The other aspect too is you have to be aware that fire is a real possibility with anything that comes to these off-road applications. So you're going to have, definitely a fire suppression system, if not like two for redundancy, and set up in a manner that appropriately controls fire throughout the chassis, not just the engine compartment and not just by a fuel cell, but in the cabin, etc. You're also going to have fire extinguishers located throughout the vehicle as well. Typically, there'll be several in the back, and there'll be several in the cab. And these are all going to be on like high quality, quick release as well. And then this is very important because safety is something that unfortunately can be and is overlooked in some or some builds per se, because it adds cost. And some people would rather spend money on X, Y, or Z before they go into the bullshit of safety. Now, safety also pertains to the chassis themselves and how it's properly or unfortunately improperly built when it comes to the cage structure, especially the stuff that is above the mid-rail, and how that intertwines with the spine of the chassis, the main structure of the chassis, things like that, so that in the event of an at-speed rollover, the occupants will be fine. Typically, any of these high-end luxury Prerunner builders are going to be more than safe enough when it comes to the speeds these vehicles will see. And that brings up another good topic to cover, the speeds. These trucks are capable of speeds almost that of competitive trophy trucks. The reason they're not quite is typically they're a little bit heavier, etc. So they might be like 10, 15 miles an hour top end slower. So they could still hit a solid 120, but they're definitely not hitting like 140, 145. Maybe some of the newer luxury Prerunners with big blocks, etc., might be doing like 128, maybe 130, but these are pretty heavy compared to a trophy truck. They're going to be a several thousand pounds heavier than its competitive trophy truck counterpart, so to speak, on average. Again, these are very rough numbers so that you guys can get a general understanding of what luxury pre-runners are in the market and not like the made-up bullshit. So from there, let's dive into some specifics on the components, and let's go into chassis and suspension. So bring that back over to this, Jack. So again, here's the chassis with all the suspension on it. This is a crew cab luxury pre-runner, front engine application, rear wheel drive, and this is a 4-seater. So you can see it's properly structured for the event, or the unfortunate event of an at-speed rollover, if that were to occur. And let's dive into the front suspension first, then we'll work our way backwards, and then we'll review details about the rear suspension. Now, on the front suspension, it's going to be referred to as a bulkhead. So we are going to pull up the bulkheads. Again, these are going to be my designs, etc. But regardless, it's just something I can show you guys so that you guys can understand real quick. So this is a front bulkhead, and what that refers to is this is the chunk that would graft onto or be the starting point of a luxury pre-runner as far as suspension forward rear. Now, what we have here is this center section that holds all of our pivots, etc. And this is an upper arm right here. This is the upright right here, and this is the lower arm. This section right here, this guy, is not the spindle. Some do refer to it as the spindle. That would be incorrect. The spindle is the section where the bearings ride for the hub assembly. So technically the spindle is part of the upright assembly, but that is technically not the what you would consider the spindle. This is considered the upright. Now this is a steering rack setup, and this is a J-arm bulkhead. Almost all the bulkheads you're going to see in luxury pre-runners are going to be considered a J-arm assembly. The reason for that is the upper arm kind of makes the shape of a J, blah, blah, blah. Very loose definition to some degree. This is just what it's called. So our upper arm here is built in this fashion so that one can control the movement of the upright, but it's controlled by a chassis pivot that is forward of the steering rack and forward of our shock assemblies. What this allows us to do is open up a lot of room for very large shocks, 4.5-inch, 4.4 bypass shocks, and 3.0 and possibly 3.5 coilovers, depending on the builder preference, budget, etc. So this chunk right down the center here that holds the lower arm pivots, the upper arm pivots, and our steering rack, which is this blue piece right here, that is called our center section. So that is the bulkhead center section. Now, this is the upper arm right here. This is our lower arm that holds the shocks, and this is our upright assembly. Our spindle, for example, would bolt on to this. It's called a snout. So, with that said, this assembly here is considered a rack-based assembly because there is a steering rack that controls the movement of your steering. Now, there is some argument between steering racks and swingers, which I will show you a swinger example here in a second. And there's some few generalities with these. One, steering rack typically is less expensive on the overall to build. It's a little bit easier to fabricate, but it moves in a linear fashion, so it does remove one of the degrees of freedom when it comes to being able to adjust the steering movement through turn, etc. So it is limited in some of the design aspects when it comes to the front geometry of these types of vehicles. And I just say some. To be crystal clear, there are vehicles with steering racks that win races literally constantly. And there's vehicles that run steering boxes, which I will show you in a second, that win races constantly. It could be driver preference or builder preference relative to which one you choose. But typically speaking, a steering rack will be a little bit less expensive than a steering box setup. Now, a steering box setup is right here. You can see the steering box, which is this piece in blue. This specific one is the new one from Power Steering Solutions, Charlie. It is a trophy truck caliber box. In fact, the big boys are running these. It is about as badass as it gets when it comes to steering boxes. And this is a swinger setup. So we have steering swingers that then hold a center link, and it's controlled by a pitman arm off of the steering box that moves side to side. And this movement side to side then controls the upright. This is called steering swingers, and this is a steering box. Now, you'll note the swingers are angled up into the chassis. This is our center link. This one is slightly turned, as you can see. And then tucked behind them, I do have the ram. So there are swinger setups that look different fit and finish, different packaging, but the principle is the same. It's swingers that literally control a center link, and that is driven directionally by the steering box and powered by a ram. Here's a quick tip. If your steering swingers are parallel, you did something wrong. You do not want your steering swingers parallel. If you start noticing any of these builds we're about to go through, you'll see a trend with the steering swinger direction, so to speak. But moving forward from there, let's go to Y-frames. So Y-frames are the floors of luxury pre-runners. And here we go. Here's a cool one to look at. This one was for a crew cab, but a good example is instead of a stock chassis to build off of, you start with a Y-frame. The Y-frame is the luxury pre-runner version of like the stock chassis underneath your Silverado. It houses all of the pickup points for the suspension, and everything mounts to it, i.e. the whole chassis cab all weld to the Y-frame. So this is your floor. This is the bottom of your cab. And in the front, we have our bulkhead assembly, which is what I just reviewed. That gets welded into the front of the floor of the Y-frame. And the reason it's called a Y-frame is it kind of makes a big Y. If you look at it, I know, again, loose definition, but this is just what the terminology is. From there, we have these rear pivot boxes that control the rear suspension. It has our lower links, our upper links, and our housing. This right here is a standard 4-link setup. Again, this is a pretty normal type of Y-frame you would see in a luxury pre-runner application. And with that said, you would then go to a chassis. So from there, you would have what we kind of already saw earlier, which are the chassis that will go onto that. So obviously, here's our Y-frame tucked underneath this guy. Let's see here. Here we go. You can kind of see the Y-frame from underneath, and then all of this tube structure is then placed on top of the Y-frame that then would complete our chassis. So those are kind of like the basics, chunks, so to speak, of what the luxury pre-runner is built off of. So for the rear suspension, let's go back to that Y-frame deal. Like I was saying, pretty much all luxury pre-runners are going to be a 4-link. Some are a 3-link, but that is very rare. So let's just focus on 4-link stuff for now. The 4 links are pretty straightforward. There is some manipulation you can make in the dimensions and things like that. But for the most part, any of the trucks that you're going to see either out in the desert or being built that are luxury pre-runners have this basic formation, which is a triangulated 4-link with the shocks mounted on the lower links like such. And the 4-link kind of looks like this direction. Now, again, there's different geometries and things like that. And, we're not going to get into those specifics in this episode. I will do episodes based on front suspension, rear suspension, and the dynamics and some of the characteristics and things like that. But again, that's a whole nother hours and hours of conversation. We're not putting that time into this one. But it's just good that you can understand and see. This is our rear housing. So this housing here holds the gear set, has your axles, and obviously your hubs, your wheels and tires bolt to that. So the drive line will come through the chassis down to the housing, and that is what rotates and turns the vehicle forward. So this right here is held by these links in the suspension. Now the lower link arms in a luxury pre-runner are going to be that of a trophy truck equivalent or a little gnarlier. The reason being is trophy trucks weigh less than a luxury pre-runner. So with that said, you can get away with arms you can get away with arms for a trophy truck that are lighter in weight and a little less gnarly, so to speak. So like here's a standard trophy truck luxury pre-runner arm that I design and I do sell this design. But the point here is I have two versions of this. I have one that's for like competitive trophy truck, which is a little bit lighter. And then we make a little bit heavier duty version for like a crew cab luxury pre-runner or an extended cab luxury pre-runner, simply because the weight is a lot more for luxury pre-runner, several thousand pounds. And with that said, that can cause some problems. The other thing too is this is a fabricated link arm. So this is like a classic traditional one. This is an old design, like 10 years old now, but it's a tube underneath, plate work on top. These are just, again, like a classic tubular base sheet metal link arm that, tons of guys make. So I'm not the first one to do this. Certainly won't be the last. There's definitely ones that look similar to this. They're all very similar in form and function. The reason being is there's a certain ratio that you kind of have. The coilover gets mounted here closest to the chassis. This is the chassis side. This is the housing side. The bypass gets mounted here. And it's a 60-inch link arm. And with an 18-inch bypass, these will be right around 35, 36, 34 inches of travel, depending on the angle of the shock, etc. So it's going to be in that range. And there's a little bit of variables to that as well, because you can move these shock mounts. You can make the link arm shorter or longer. Some of them will go up to 65 inches, 66 inches. And that's a fabricated one. Now, let me show you an example of another. Like here's one right here that we did that's a 60. This is a 66-inch link arm. These are for a much gnarlier application too, and they are billet. So these are, we did, you can see the stress analysis on these, but these are a billet link arm with carbon fiber panels that bolt in. And so this is all machined out of 7075. They are expensive to make. They're pretty gnarly, etc. These run 1.5-inch bearings, but again, just another form of a link arm as opposed to the traditional fabricated ones. These are becoming far more popular, the billet link arms themselves, and you are seeing more builders do billet link arms. For a few factors. One, it's pretty cool. Two, it cuts down on time consumption in the shop to build the vehicle, because you can have this out at machine while your fabricators are welding up other stuff. And believe it or not, there's a lot to be said for that, because that can free up some time to get the vehicle from start to finish. And the other thing too is these are pretty freaking strong. So when done properly, these are very robust for these types of applications. And not to mention the cool factor. So again, you always got to keep that in mind too. But just because it's a fabricated link arm, again, doesn't mean it's any worse. They're plenty strong enough. The way a lot of these guys weld stuff these days, it's beautiful anyways. So, and you can heat treat these, etc., etc. So a lot of cool stuff there as well. We can go into some sway bar stuff too. So every single rear of a luxury pre-runner is going to have a sway bar assembly. And on the front, it's hit or miss. Some guys do like to run a front sway bar on them. Some guys don't. Again, different strokes for different folks and variables. So let's look, here you go. Here's a good example of one with a big sway bar. So on this specific chassis, I mounted the sway bar in the rear, comes off the bottom of the cell, and picks up the housing like so. It's an 1.5-inch bar, and these arms are pretty big. I think it's like 38 inches or 36-inch long arms, etc., etc. But you can see here with the rear suspension fully drooped out, the sway bar is connecting to the rear. Here's our bypass shock. Here's our coilover shock. Here's our bump stop. And here's our link arm that supports that, etc. And I'm going to go into shocks here in a second. But this sway bar is a must. You can't get away without one in the rear of these vehicles. Like I said, you can definitely do a sway bar on the front, but not everyone does, nor do you have to. A lot of guys can control these vehicles appropriately without a front sway bar. Driver preference comes into play too. Some drivers really like front sway bars. Some really dislike front sway bars. So again, there's a lot of variable in that. I've seen luxury pre-runners built with them, luxury pre-runners built without them. So there is no definitive on that. But on the rear, you definitely need a rear sway bar. It is going to get very squirrely without one. So let's dive into shocks. Another one of my favorites. So we're We're going to use King shocks for this example, simply because I use a lot of King shocks in a lot of different stuff. But to be fair, I do purchase both Fox and King shocks. And if you're building a luxury Prerunner, you are pretty much only going to be using either one of those. You're not really going to be deviating from Fox or King. Now, there's like ADS, etc., but a true luxury Prerunner, you're pretty much going to be doing King shocks or Fox shocks. Both of them win races constantly, and both of them are very high caliber and quality. And the packages that you would be getting from King or Fox are probably in the mid to high 30s, 40 grand range, roughly speaking, depending on sizes, depending on some other options and some other BS. So each corner of a luxury Prerunner, here we go, is going to have 3 components to the shock package. You're going to have a coilover, a bypass, and you're going to have a bump stop. Now, with that said, we're going to go through the coilovers first. The coilovers are going to hold the truck up, but also provide some dampening. And again, there's some variation in this because there's different tuners that like different things. But typically speaking, what you're going to see is a coilover that is going to be a 3.0 or a 3.5 in some instances. They may even be an internal bypass coilover, just to add confusion. But the shock tuners are going to be able to swap out spring rates and the internals of a coilover to make adjustments appropriately speaking. So for King shocks, you would have, most are going to run like a 3.0 coilover. There are guys, like I'm saying, that will run a 3.5. And they do the internal bypass. So that's pretty cool. And this is, what a coilover looks like that would be on a luxury Prerunner, etc. This is a remote reservoir. You can get ones without a remote reservoir. They're called a piggyback reservoir, but you typically don't see that given packaging issues, etc., etc. This is also a dual rate. So you have your top and your bottom spring. And we can get into more specific. I mean, again, this is a whole nother hours of conversation on this. But the reality is, for a luxury Prerunner, typically the packages are going to see a coilover in the front that's about a 14-inch stroke, and the rear is going to be a 16-inch stroke. And the reason for that is the travel numbers, which we'll get into that shortly here as well. Now, to accompany the coilover is going to be what's considered a bypass shock. So the bypass is mounted in the rear behind the coilover, and in the front, the bypass can be in front or to the rear of the coilover. It doesn't matter in the front because they're the same stroke length and a builder preference. But in the rear, the bypass is going to have a higher stroke length given the leverage ratio on this link arm. So, with that said, the bypasses control the movement of the suspension because it has different stages on the bypass, both compression and rebound, and what that'll do is allow you to tune the different stages, the movement of the suspension, differently. So the shock tuner is going to be able to dial that in to complement the coilover and the internals of the coilover. And the bypass shock looks like these guys. This one on the right is a King Kong, like a 4.5. That's a pretty typical shock. Obviously, it's much bigger than a 2.5 or a standard race shock that you might find in other vehicles like buggies, etc. Luxury Prerunners are heavy, big trucks that are going to go fast. They're going to be at a minimum a 4.0 bypass in the front and typically a 4.5 bypass in the rear, or if it's a Fox, it'd be a 4.4 bypass. Now, just because the Fox is a slightly smaller shock, it doesn't mean that it performs any less. Fox does a phenomenal job with their 4.4 bypasses. Again, both of those are of high caliber. Either package is going to be just fine for any luxury Prerunner. When it comes to controlling the final stage or the bump stop, so to speak, those are mounted in the chassis relative to the suspension to control the final stage of compression. And so the bump stop is going to be the third piece to the puzzle when it comes to each corner and controlling your travel. Now, on the bump stops, Typically, those are going to be 2.5-inch diameter bump stops, although we do have clients now running 3-inch diameter king bump stops, which are a little gnarly, but again, everything is going in that direction to some degree. And these are what they look like. There's a few variations of them and how they mount into the chassis, but they are a hydraulic bump stop, and it controls the very final stage. So when you go off of a jump or hit a really hard hit or something that you may have not caught right away, so it caught you by surprise, it's going to engage this at the very end and kind of help buffer those really hard hits. You don't really want to be hitting them too much, but they are there for those hard hits. And so each of those are on all four corners. So you're going to have 4 coilovers, 4 bypasses, and 4 bump stops. And like I was saying, these are like, in the mid to high 30s. A shock package cost for, to a $40,000 range, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, so now you understand what the shocks are. So now let's go into wheel travel. You can bring it to me, Jack. And some of the definitions, or the 2 definitions that people use with wheel travel, because again, just like how people misuse the term luxury prerunner, which is total bullshit, and people need to stop doing that. You know who you are. The wheel travel is also misused quite a bit as well. The 2 numbers that kind of are the only numbers to pay attention to would be like metal to metal wheel travel and what would be considered usable wheel travel. Now, metal to metal wheel travel is when you design a suspension, you're going to have a max and a min of the shock full compression and full extension lengths. And that is metal to metal, i.e. the shock literally is touching metal to metal. It cannot go any further to be compressed, and the shock cannot extend anymore, metal to metal. Now, when the truck is moving through the desert, you don't ever want it to hit either one of those. It would be very bad. It would literally destroy the shock and a ton of other shit in the chassis. The reason for that is these shocks, although they are insanely strong, they are not strong enough to take those specific impacts. So when it comes to the compression side, the metal to metal measurement of that travel is reduced by putting the bump stop in a fashion that takes up a little bit of that compression travel, so that the bump stop is the final stop before the bypass shock fully compresses, and this is what saves the suspension. I have seen bump stops completely torn off, etc. At that point, you're fucked. But before that, you are going to have the suspension compress. You can pull this, put it back to this one. This is a good example, actually. You're going to have this suspension compress and hit this bump stop before these shocks fully compress. Same with the rear. This is going to compress, and it's going to contact the bump stop, so the bump stop will bottom out before the big shocks will. And what that does is protect the shocks, and that's considered full compression. And so you're going to have a little bit taken off of that metal to metal travel number on the top side. Now on the bottom side, you're going to have limit straps that hold the suspension up and prevent the shocks from overextending. So in this situation, we would strap it up a hair. So let's say, for example, like on the rear of this truck right here, metal to metal for that 18-inch bypass is about 34.6 inches. What we do is we go a little conservative with it. We're going to bump and strap that at right around 33, so that we have a solid like 3/4 of an inch-ish to be conservative with, just in case stuff moves and flexes, etc. So that at no point in time are we metal to metal on the bypass shock, risking it either completely collapsing or pulling itself apart. And the reason we do that is because now we have a measurement of usable wheel travel, which is the real number you want to know. A lot of people use metal to metal as the number they claim for travel, which is pretty much bullshit because that's not usable travel. So they might say 36 inches, but the reality is it's only using 33 because it's bumped and strapped at 33. The shock may move 36, but you ain't going to those extremes, and you don't want to be that close to those extremes. That's a bad idea. On the front, like on this truck right here, it's going to be like 24.75, and we'll be conservative at like 23 and change, or 24. So usable will be 24 inches. Metal to metal might be like 25 inches. So again, we want to use the usable wheel travel number, not the metal to metal wheel travel number, because it's kind of dishonest. It's not real. You want to know what the truck is actually using as usable. And let's be crystal clear. You might hear these exuberant numbers, etc., but a luxury Prerunner that has 24 inches of wheel travel in the front and the low 30s in the rear, either 31, 32, 33, 34, is plenty. That is perfect. You do not need more than that. It'll be more important to have it controlled properly with your camber and caster curves and your toe curves appropriately than it is to get 28 inches of wheel travel and 36 inches of wheel travel, 38 inches of wheel travel, etc. So, just to be clear, 24 inches of wheel travel in the front, 32, 33, 34 is pretty much standard for almost all of these big platform trucks. That's usable wheel travel, and that is more or less the same for all trophy trucks as well. A few might deviate slightly from that, but that's a pretty good number to be at for usable wheel travel as far as generically speaking for the majority of competitive vehicles and luxury Prerunners. So you can bring it back. So with that said, we've gone through the definition, which is a tube chassis vehicle, no stock frame rails whatsoever, that has a cab on it with doors and a full interior. Trophy truck in form and shape when it comes to suspension and performance, and luxury on the interior. And that's what we're about to dive into, because I'm going to show you guys my favorite builders. And it does not mean this is a specific order, because they all have their positives and they all do really nice work. But let's start this process. So first, let's go to Geyser. Geyser Bros. They've been around forever. Like, I don't know, longer than I've been alive, possibly. Well, not really, but Rick and Jeff have been building. God, they're at least at like 70-something chassis now, maybe even 80. But here you go. Here's a luxury Prerunner from Geyser Brothers. This is Dan Belzerian's luxury Prerunner. Extended cab. It's a 4-seater, I believe. Yeah, this is a 4-seater, I think. And they did a really good job on this. Full interior, leather wrap tubes. As you can start to see, this is the interior. This does not look like a race truck. So if you looked at a race truck, obviously this is different. Bitchin' console. I mean, everything in this is set up appropriately. Here's some other good aspects to note. Here's the fire extinguishers, like I was mentioned earlier. Here's part of our cooling system. This is engine and trans cooling. Our fuel cells in the rear, like I mentioned. Spare tires in the rear, like I mentioned, behind the axle. I believe this truck is a big block, 900 horsepower. So this baby can probably do 130. Up front, just like I was mentioning, we've got our bypass shock right here, our coilover. Now this is a Fox package. Again, badass stuff. Here is our bump stop. I do not believe this truck runs a front sway bar, and I do believe this truck is a steering box setup. But Geyser Brothers is one of my favorites. They've been doing this for a long time. If you have the discretionary income to afford a Prerunner like this, like a Dan Belzerian, there's a high probability you're never going to see this video. So just fucking ignore me. Moving on from there, let's go to Jimco. Jimco Racing. Another builder of race trucks, although I don't think they've built as many as Geyser has or has had many wins. I could be wrong, but they're up there definitely. And here's an interior shot of one of their luxury Prerunners. Oh, here's a video. I think this is Robbie right here from Jimco. As you can see, these guys are pre-running for the Baja 1000, and at a decent pace, nice and comfortable coming through the desert. There's a shot underneath. Let's see if we can. I know what we will do. Let's go to good old Google. Jimco luxury Prerunner. Perfect. Oh, here we go. Fireball. Spitfire Racing. There we go. Oh, here's, again, perfect shots. So this one, great interior. This matches these guys' race truck, Spitfire. Leather wrap dash. The electronics package is perfect. They got a nice iPad in here. I mean, this is built and set up for hours and hours of pre-running in comfort. Air conditioning, cup holders. Look at that. That is a leather wrap seat. Impact again, these are high quality components. I love impact stuff. And all logoed out, all nicely done to match. I mean, real no bullshit. Here's a good example of the front suspension. This is a front sway bar for a luxury Prerunner. They do mount theirs up above the bulkhead center section and on the upper arm. But this is your sway bar assembly. Your bar is right here, your arm's right here, and your link is right here. Now, with that said, not everyone likes these, so some guys will run them, some guys won't. This is a steering box setup, and there's some swingers down there. But this is a Fox package with the bypass mounted towards the rear, coilover mounted towards the front. And again, Fox makes great stuff. Great stuff. So let's look at, here's a good outside profile. So on this truck right here, we've got our B-pillar tube coming up, our B-pillar support, and the C-pillar. And the way they do this B-pillar support is they bring that down to the bump stop area, etc. And so that creates some nice triangulation in the event of a rollover. And then they also do that because they do not have a down tube coming back here, which creates a really nice bed line. So again, very high-end caliber truck. Pretty cool with style. Like, these guys definitely nailed it because the Spitfire trophy truck is the same get up, etc. So I mean, it's fucking matching, and that's some serious money as far as discretionary income is concerned for these types of builds. So that's Jimco. So let's move on to let's see. Next on the list is Stewart's. Stewart's Raceworks, Craig Stewart, legendary son of the legendary father. Here's a good example of one of the Stewart's Raceworks Prerunners. Or actually, that might be a Geyser. But anyways, the Stewart's does prep law stuff. Here is the Stewart's. So this one right here is for Steve Benzies, Bryce Benzies' dad. These are badass. I did see this one in person. Again, fuel cell. This is a wraparound cell with the spares in the back. Both are behind the rear axle, like I was saying. They do run a steering box setup in theirs. Coilover in front of the bypass. This is a Fox package, probably a big block as well. Again, good shot of the interior, so you can see how awesome that is. This is a 3-seater platform. Here's a refrigerator. Here's our B-pillar. The headliner covers all the tubing up there, but it does have the proper structure in there, etc., etc. Here's a good side profile shot. You can see the link arm coming down from the Y-frame. And again, just super high quality stuff. And if you want to see how these are built, there is a great series on YouTube of from like 11 years ago from Stewart's. Stewart's Raceworks Raptor Prerunner, of them building these Prerunners. So here's here they are, right here. So go check these out. These are badass. This was 10, 11 years ago. And they kind of showcase the behind the scenes of building these things from the start to finish. Now, they are not stock Raptors at all. There's nothing stock other than the cab on these. And you can kind of see how a luxury Prerunner goes together. These are very expensive, high caliber Prerunners from Stewart's. Arguably the most expensive to some degree. So, yeah. Here's another good shot of a Stewart's luxury Prerunner. Chassis with the cab on it. No expense spared. Just big boy shit. Yeah, see, they do have a little bit of a unique system. Their swingers are a little different than some of the other swinger setups, but it does work really well. There's a lot of guys that enjoy the way these things feel at speed in the dirt. So there's just so much cool stuff in these. This is our wraparound cell. Our spare tires go right here. Again, another style, as opposed to what I was showing some of the others were the cells below the spare tire mounts. Yeah, here's a good example of the rear. You can kind of see this fuel cell right here. And again, stock cab with the chassis. And these are definitely in that high dollar range cost-wise. So let's go on to another one. Let's go to another one I really like, the Racer Engineering. Let's see. We'll Google that one. Dale Dondale at Racer Engineering built one for Jim Smith. Racer Engineering Ledger Prerunner. Here we go. This is a cool one because this one is on 42-inch tires. The majority of luxury Prerunners are going to run 40-inch tires. Some will run 42s, but this does have a 42-inch package. This chassis itself is similar in setup, etc., to Luke McMillan's championship winning chassis. It's a trophy truck. And they have their own style with how they do things. But these are, C42-inch projects, 110-gallon cell, 92 by 130-inch wheelbase. So again, just another high-caliber builder and a very nice luxury Prerunner platform that is the fit and finish of something that you would have in a luxury vehicle with a trophy truck style platform. And that is Dale Dundale of Racer Engineering. One of my personal favorites. I really like this truck. I have never been in that truck or driven it, so I couldn't tell you on that aspects, but knowing how the racers are and how they feel behind the wheel, I would imagine this truck handles pretty well. So let's also go on to, another favorite of mine, Weitzel. W-E-I-T-Z-L. Let's see if anything comes up. Cool. Got a few. Good old-fashioned Jesse James Weitzel on Race Desert. This is another great source of cool stuff to look at. So this is an older build, but nonetheless, this is a great example of another luxury Prerunner. Weitzel does build a lot of cool stuff, and I'll show you some videos here in a second. But again, this is a luxury Prerunner that was done for Jesse James many years ago. I mean, probably like 15 years ago now. And it's a Chevy, and just badass. I mean, back then this was badass. It's still badass now. Steering rack. You can see the bulkhead, lower arms. Here's your upright, upper arms, shock package. Interior. This is a 4-seater and an extended cab where they did kind of like a bench, pseudo bench seat-esque deal in this one. So this is a little bit older of a build. Let's check out one of the newer ones. Let's go back. Let's see. View all. Because he's done a few new ones. They're just here. Yeah, here was the Mirage ones. He did a brand new one for Thomas Fletcher. Here we go. This is Morgan Clark. Or no, this is something else. This is an ad. These guys, Land Rover can suck it. Anyways, this is Terra Crew does these videos, and Morgan Clark did this specific video, and this is for Thomas Fitcher's Weitzel Chevy Prerunner. And this is a really good walk around. So Morgan is also a builder, and I'll get to that in a moment, but he does a good job of showcasing the Weitzel stuff. And Jimmy Weitzel does build really nice trucks. I absolutely love his style. And these things work really freaking well for the big trucks. Man, do they dance, and they get the fuck down. They're a little on the heavy side, but goddamn do they work. They are, I don't know how many have been built, but I want to say like at least 4 or 5 teams have Weitzel trucks. I know Jason McNeil does, and he loves it. He just got a relatively new one that Terra Crew. So if you go to Terra Crew's YouTube channel, TerraCrew, these guys have a bunch of videos, and some of the videos are of real luxury Prerunners, like the Weitzel chassis. And so that's just another cool video you can check out that Morgan Clark did for Terra Crew that goes into this. And again, Weitzel is just one of those badass builders, been in the game for a long time, has built a bunch of these. And let's see what he's got on his page. Here's one right here that he just finished for TDF Thomas. This is the one that the video is on that I was just referring to. But he does, his own style and flavor. And again, it's a, trophy truck in flavor and performance chassis with a cab on it. If you have the money for this stuff, these are definitely very expensive. Higher caliber on the cost range for sure. From there, let's go to Blitzkrieg BMS. Now, Weitzel, I believe, will sell you a roller chassis. Not all builders will, but Weitzel will. And Blitzkrieg will as well. And he's had he's done a few luxury Prerunners. This is Nate Hansen of Blitzkrieg. And so he does trophy trucks and stuff too, but obviously does luxury pre-runners. And his pre-runners are the same platforms as his race trucks, just like all these other builders. Here's a perfect example right here of a roller chassis. Like if you were to buy one from Nate, this is what it would show up as, basically. And I don't know what the specific cost on this is, but I would assume 6 figures roughly for this package, because it's a trophy truck with a cab on it, roller. And he's got a few of them. Let's see if we got more pictures on here of them. He's got a ton of different stuff. Here's another one, luxury pre-runner. Joe Black Racing's pre-runner. And it's the Blitzkrieg trophy truck stuff in a luxury pre-runner platform. Really cool stuff and quality. So again, just another builder, Blitzkrieg Motorsports, Nate Hansen. You can contact him. Tisco. Tisco is building luxury pre-runners in-house. And so they did one for Terry Racing, if I remember correctly. Let's see if we can find it on their page. You can kind of see it right here. Here's one being built in their shop. They obviously are building race trucks too, but this one with the cab on it is a luxury pre-runner being built with the same suspension that goes on the luxury pre-runners, et cetera, et cetera. Same suspension, that goes on the trophy trucks that they sell. Let's see. This, looks like another pre-runner. They refreshed this one. I believe this was a geyser that they refreshed. So some of the builders will work on other guys' stuff, et cetera, et cetera. That's just how the industry goes. But yeah, so Tisco is another one. I do know some of the guys that work down there. Very talented fabricators, very talented team in general with a lot of experience. Here's a cool picture. This is a Y-frame going together on one of their tables. So here's your bulkhead, and here you can see they're starting to lay out the Y-frame, and here's their rear pivot boxes. So again, all luxury pre-runners start with this design, or start with this floor, and everyone has their own variation. Tisco has their own variation. Geyser has theirs, blah, blah, blah. I have mine. I have a few variations, etc. So different strokes for different folks when it comes to that stuff. But again, no slouch in quality and badassness when it comes to their work and luxury pre-runners. From there, let's go on to ES Motorsports. And HMES is Eric Smith. So ES Motorsports. So these guys did that one I was referring to earlier. That was a mid-engine. It's like the Grove Racing luxury pre-runner. Let me see if I can find it real quick. If I can find this, that would be amazing. Because there's not a lot of pictures of that specific truck online, if I remember correctly. But ES can definitely build a luxury pre-runner. Although I believe ES has been sold, so Eric Smith does not own it anymore. And it's the Wilson brothers out of Vegas that now own ES. But I believe they have all the fixtures, they have all the other stuff. They're taking over some of the bits where ES left off to some degree. And so they still build luxury pre-runners and things along those lines. So you could totally contact them. In fact, I believe, here we go. Jeffrey Wilson, Jeff Tim and Jeffrey Wilson. Yep, out of Las Vegas. So they now own ES and all the bits. So I'm assuming they will be taking that forward. And let's see, from there, let's go. HM Motorsports is another builder. That is not the HM I'm thinking of. A little more of an old school guy. He has built some pre-runners back in the day, etc. They've been around for a long time. And name's Kevin is the owner, etc. And you can contact him, and he's done quite a few several tube chassis luxury pre-runners. Like here's Outlaw Off-Road one. This is a tube chassis pre-runner. This is one of like I mean it's a little old now, but pretty rad truck. Again, trophy truck in form and fit and finish, and all that good stuff. So that's another builder. Let's go look at another favorite of mine is Everson. Everson did one for it might be Terry Motorsports, if I remember correctly. We're gonna find that here in a second. They did a good job. I don't know how many of these he has built, but maybe 2. But I know he has done a bunch of like race truck and race truck variant stuff. But as far as like the big boy luxury pre-runners, I know he did one that was really nicely done. And I really want to get pull that up because I want to show some pictures of that. Come on, Everson. You know, I found these the other day like way easier, and now it's taking too much time. I think it's like Terry Motorsports. Let me just see if I can. Yes, I was correct. Terry Motorsports. Cool. So this is an Everson truck. Again, this is a really cool way he did some of this stuff. I like how clean some of this is. This is a great clean bed line, nice fire extinguisher placement. There's your SATCOM, no down tubes, but he does support the chassis properly. Fuel cells back here. And they did post a nice picture of it being built. Here we go. This is a cool picture. This is up at Everson shop. I think it's in Paso Robles, if I remember correctly. And here you go, front engine. You can kind of see the Y-frame in this section, rear pivot box. Here's your rear link. Here's your front bulkhead. He does run a swinger setup. And here's your fuel cell tray and the spare tire back here. And you can kind of see the substructure that he has in place to support the B pillar. So the C pillar is basically the back of the cab. And this is a really nice pre-runner. He did a good job. Hopefully he does make some more of these, because this one, it came out clean as fuck. And they did a great photo shoot for it too. For Race Desert, yeah. What a clean truck. I mean, these things are pretty gorgeous. Definitely some money. Although he may not be one of the more expensive, like he's probably less investment than say like a Stewart's, but that doesn't necessarily mean that this truck can't get down and be just as badass. So there's just another good example of another builder. Let's go to Morgan Clark, MCD1. So he is doing something a little different. Morgan is building what he considers a exotic pre-runner. That's right, exotic pre-runner. And here is the exotic pre-runner. I'm pretty sure, yeah, exotic. So this guy right here is a luxury pre-runner, but he's calling it exotic pre-runner because he's doing some stuff to kind of bring that to a little bit of a higher level to match and align itself with exotic cars. And I really like that because he's trying to go above and beyond with some of the artistic aspects of this truck in a way that you don't see very often. And so we'll see how this turns out. He's still building it. Hopefully be done inside the next year and a half on the high side. But this is going to be a full tilt deal. So every single inch of this is going to be just meticulously gone through, as he would say. And if you watch like that video I told you earlier about him talking about the Weitzel's, etc., he does use that term gone through a lot. But he does a lot of cool stuff. And he's very artistic with how he forms and fits everything, where he kind of meshes mechanical with this sort of art form and an eye towards like this level of luxuriousness that is not seen with all luxury pre-runners. So he, in essence, might be creating its own category, which is exotic luxury pre-runners. So I don't know, at the end of the day, for obvious reasons, this is a lot more time consumption to build and a lot more fit and finish to some degree. So here's a perfect example of one of these things that he's doing that's just fucking rad. Like as far as like this new sort of subset of the genre luxury pre-runners. He's doing a single wiper blade, just like you would see in like a Le Mans race car. Again, I haven't seen this done in like a luxury pre-runner. It doesn't sound like a big deal, but it's kind of cool. You know, something that's definitely different and helps you kind of stand out from the rest. Not to mention all the other fancy metalwork, etc. I mean, the guy does take his time and really go about things in a way that it has an artistic touch. So when this is said and done, this could be $1 million truck. I mean, fuck, I don't even know. But he's got a lot of time into it. Like, here's the back chunk that he's working on. Again, nowhere near done, but he's getting there. And he just puts a lot of effort into the artistic aspects of these pre-runners. And he does have some videos. That's right. He does have a YouTube channel. I wonder what it is. MCD1, probably. That's got to be it. That is it. Okay, cool. Morgan Clark Design. So yeah, here's a ton of cool videos on his the exotic luxury pre-runner that he's doing, stuff like that. And the guy definitely leans more towards the artistic stuff as far as this goes. I don't want to get like copyright fuckery. Come on with the ads. You guys suck. But Morgan is a character, and he's an artist, and he likes to bring the artistic touch to all this stuff. And it's kind of cool to listen to him talk about what he does on the artistic side and bring that forward into the sheet metal, as opposed to just attacking it with sheet metal or fabric, etc. Like he's taking a step back from that and going at this as if he was painting a picture to some degree, and then he's kind of formulating that picture in the real world in metal. So again, something you should definitely look at and check out as far as videos go with luxury pre-runner, like real luxury pre-runners, and in this case, exotic luxury pre-runners. So when this thing is said and done, obviously he still has a ways to go, but it's going to be rad. I've seen this truck in person. He's doing a good job. He's a hard worker. This dude busts his fucking ass, and he is going to really change some of this luxury pre-runner game if he continues in the direction, or at least the stuff I've seen in person and some of the stuff I just showed you, into this exotic field. And so we'll see. Maybe this becomes a new category of exotic luxury pre-runners, and then I have to do a whole other fucking video on this to differentiate the people who are using the term exotic luxury pre-runner when they shouldn't be. Piss more people off, you know? And then from there, we can go on to another guy who has kind of entered this market. Technically has not finished one yet, but that is Ryan Kibb. Now, Ryan is and has used the term luxury pre-runner incorrectly in the past, and he has. So to be fair, he is now building full tube chassis trucks. So he is building what would be considered luxury pre-runners. But before, he would associate some of his builds as luxury pre-runners when technically they are not. But whatever, he does good work. Here's one that he's working on right now, and these are tube chassis trucks. So now he is building legitimate luxury pre-runners, and I think he's doing a few of them right now. And they are a swing set steering setup, similar to how some of these other trucks are done with his own fit and finish and flavor. Matt over there is his main CAD guy, I believe, doing a lot of that. Let's see if there's any more pictures of those trucks. Let's see. I'm sure he does. He usually posts a lot of stuff. Oh, here's another one. Yeah, so here's tube chassis setup. Yeah, so you can see just a cab on the chassis. And these are not cheap. Again, these are full tilt, no bullshit pre-runners. And Ryan does do some quality. They have a lot of cool machining stuff too. They're doing that in-house. You got a 5-axis, so they're going wild with that, which is pretty rad to see. But again, just another guy. Here's a perfect example. Here's one of the luxury pre-runners. Now his style is sort of this cab style where he's doing a 2-seat and an extended cab, etc. But I think he is doing a shorter wheelbase, so it's more like a trophy truck with just a cab on it per se, in fashion. So probably like a 125, 126 wheelbase. But I don't know for sure, so may have to check back on that. But yeah, just here's your bulkhead going into your Y-frame. Here's your pivot boxes sticking up right here. And so again, same style of platform that I was referring to. So this meets the definition. These are also the proper seats, non-suspension seats, eh? Again, what I was referring to before was safety. So those are a good rounding of builders, etc. Now, when it comes to doing things yourself or DIY, so to speak, we have, I have a bunch of designs that are non-proprietary designs that I sell on digital asset marketplace for the off-road industry, which is DIYoffroad.com. And so what this is designs you can buy that I sell to build your own. So for example, like here's a stage 1 luxury Prerunner platform for an extended cab or a crew cab. We can do it for either or a single cab. And we sell this design for $6,400. And so if you want to build your own, and this one right here is plasma table friendly. So this is a stage 1 starting point. And what this is all the cut files and everything. So you would purchase the design. We would send all the tubes off to laser cut for you. All of those would show up on a pallet. All the plate, etc. You can either cut on your plasma table, because this one is set up to be plasma table friendly, or we can have everything laser cut. It's your preference. And to do a little bit more expensive and a little bit more serious, or like a real competitive trophy truck type platform in a luxury Prerunner, would be like one of our stage 3s. Like obviously this is $15,000 for the design. I've sold a handful of these, and these are very competitive rear wheel drive luxury Prerunner platforms. And again, it would be the same thing. This is just for far more advanced builders, so to speak. It does require a lot more investment, both for the files, but in the build itself, because it has a lot of tooling, fixtures, and just higher caliber. So be considered more of a competitive platform, so to speak, in fit and finish, strength to weight ratio, things like that. So if you want to build your own, this would be on this side of the table, so to speak, where me or someone that does the same thing I do, so to speak, would get you a file to build your own truck from. And so this would be like one way of doing it. This is your full chassis. Another way, let's say you just want to do the floor. You want to start with a Y-frame. I sell a bunch of Y-frame designs. Here are several right here. Stage 2 Y-frame design for like this truck right here. I'd sell you all the cut files, and you can have all this laser cut, and then you weld it up, or your buddies, etc., and you guys can build your platform from there. You take your Y-frame and build the tube chassis to your cab, etc. And I do these in quite a few different fit and finishes and flavors. We make them to fit your cab, your wheelbase, and preference. The more complex, the stage 3, etc. These are obviously the serious ones, so to speak. And then we have like stage 2, and there's some variables, and we have stage 1, which would be like the most plasma table friendly per se. So again, you could start with the Y-frame and move your way up. And it doesn't have to be for me. I am one guy that does this stuff. There are definitely others, and there are definitely guys who are very capable. I am by no means the end-all be-all when it comes to this stuff. Or you could simply just start with the front bulkhead and go from there. So you could get the cut files for just the front suspension and build your Prerunner from there. So this DIYoffroad.com site has tons of these design files that we list for sale, and other designers, to be fair, that you can build yourself. And so this would be like the ultimate variant of doing luxury Prerunner stuff, where you're doing all of the work, so to speak, as opposed to just buying from like the builders I was showing you. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of guys that go this route because either they love doing it, or they don't have the funds to appropriately just pay a builder to do all of it. Or you are a builder and you want to build something like this yourself. Boom. We make it easy. Or the other side of the table is you would pay us like at Tech to design one that's a proprietary design just for you. You can bring it back to me, Jack. We are designing one from scratch, and we're doing all of the specifications relative to what you want. So like if you want a real all-wheel drive luxury Prerunner, mid-engine, portals, the bee's knees on all the bits, we would draw that for you from the ground up, and that would be your proprietary design. Or we can take stuff from DIY Off-Road that are the non-proprietary designs and mix and match those and make that work for you. Or I could draw a rear-wheel drive platform, again, that is proprietary just for you as well. So this is the other way of doing things, and this is one of the ways that I make money and make a living is designing and consulting for these specific applications, luxury pre-runners. So if you guys have questions, my name is Jason. The best way to get a hold of me is jason@techconsulting.com, and I can show you that right now. Boom. And so you can reach out to us if this is something you want us to do or you're interested in having a vehicle designed, and we can try and help you out. We're super busy, et cetera, et cetera. So we do the best we can to keep everybody happy. But contact us. I don't even know. You could do this. You could call our number, 888-558-8355. I try to do my best to get back to everyone within 24 hours. So just let me know. Or my email is jason@techconsulting.com. So again, if you guys just have questions, new to this, trying to figure out what you want to do, what you want to build, don't know how to go about either purchasing a luxury pre-runner or building a luxury pre-runner, I could give you some references and referrals to builders if you are legitimately looking for a turnkey pre-runner like some of the guys I showed you earlier. I could point you in the right direction relative to your flavor and style and possibly budget constraints. And or if you just want to talk shit, just feel free. There's the number, etc. So yeah, that's a quick little discussion on luxury pre-runners. Now, I could easily go through another 40, 50 hours of luxury pre-runners. I just wanted to try and give you guys the quickest overview I can to uphold the definition of tube chassis, trophy truck in essence, with a steel cab and a full interior. That's a luxury pre-runner. If you have stock frame rails underneath or any part at all, stock frame rails, I'm sorry, you do not have a luxury pre-runner. We have to hold that definition somewhere, and we have to hold that line. We do so out of respect for those who can afford luxury pre-runners. We do so out of respect for the craftsmen who build luxury pre-runners, etc., etc. Now, you can still have a very nice pre-runner that may not be a luxury pre-runner, but it can still be a very nice pre-runner. And you could have a very nice pre-runner that's more expensive than some of the luxury pre-runners, and that's totally fair. But we got to be crystal clear. A luxury pre-runner is defined in that fashion for those reasons. My name is Jason Elvis Hurd. Please point all of your shit talk to my email, etc., or comments. I probably won't read them, but hopefully you have learned a few things from this, and we're going to have a lot more of these discussions on all of these topics because I have an unfortunate large amount of information in my head about this stuff. And we're going to do, like I was saying, stuff on front suspension, stuff on rear suspension, stuff on shocks. We'll go in more depth on racetracks. We'll go in more depth on these luxury pre-runners. But this is a great overview. So again, thank you for watching this video. Thank you for watching JEHC. And until next time, gentlemen, pitter patter.